booktube. My name is Elizabeth and I read bouquets in French and books in English, and in this video there will be both. So this is just a weekly reads video where I will talk about what I'm reading and what I have read. I will start with what I am reading. Oh, by the way, I will leave timestamps in the description box in case you want to jump ahead or in case you don't want to hear about certain books. It happens. So I'm going to start with the books that I am currently reading. The first one, The Odyssey by Homer, and this is the Emily Wilson translation. I am reading this with the Eclectic Book Club, and I think it's wonderful. I love the book. I love the translation. Not that I can compare it to anything. It's the first time I'm reading The Odyssey, but the Emily Wilson's translation reads very, very well. And as I said last week, the book itself is well made. There's an introduction, there are maps, there's a glossary, and everything is made for the reader so that we can easily understand what is going on and so that we are not struggling with the book. So I think this is wonderful. And to give you an idea of the things we discuss in the book club, in case you've never been part of a book club and you don't know what it can bring you, I asked a question in the discussion because there's something that to me didn't make sense. Odysseus at some point visits the land of the dead, Hades. And the way he can talk to the spirits is by making a sacrifice and inviting the spirits, the dead, to drink the sacrifice, to drink the blood. And he realizes quickly that he can only talk to them one at a time. So to avoid all the spirits coming at the same time to have a drink, he pulls out his sword and threatens the others with his sword so that they will keep away while one person at a time is drinking. And I was wondering, if these people are already dead, why are they afraid of the sword? What can happen to them? They're dead anyway. So there was a few attempts at answers because, of course, none of us is a Greek specialist. None of us is a specialist of ancient Greece, a historian, or a classicist, or anything of the sort. We're just ordinary readers. So a few answers were attempted. One made a parallel with Lord of the Rings, and I thought it was a good parallel because in one battle they fight ghosts. And if the ghosts can hurt the humans, well, in a way, I guess the humans can hurt the ghosts. And someone else mentioned that perhaps our modern notion of ghost, of spirit, is not the same as that of ancient Greek. Of course, we are all reading translation, so we don't know what is the original word, and perhaps the original word used implies more than just a spirit. It's probably a body incarnation of some sort of that spirit, a concrete incarnation. And it reminded me that in the Iliad, the gods are taking part in the battle and the gods are wounded. They are bleeding some sort of silvery substance. So they are immortal, but they can be wounded. So the conclusion was that these spirits are probably more than abstract ideas. They probably have some sort of bodily incarnation, and that they can be wounded. They can suffer physically even though they are already dead. So that is our conclusion. So that was one of the many discussions that we have in the book group, and I think it makes the reading even more interesting. So I am, as I said, we are now about 2/3 of the way through. Odysseus is back in Ithaca, and we are about to see the denouement, how Odysseus will regain his kingdom, his authority. So that's one thing I'm reading. The other thing that I'm reading is The Sinner and the Saint by Kevin Birmingham. It is about how Dostoyevsky came to write Crime and Punishment, which is one of his most famous books. And the image that you see on the cover is taken from a French newspaper, I think. It is a crime that occurred in the 1830s, and that is about 30 years before Dostoyevsky wrote Crime and Punishment. And apparently it is the one crime that was the inspiration for Crime and Punishment. I'm about, this one also about 2/3 of the way in. I'm at page 190 out of 350, I think. And it is mainly about Dostoyevsky, which is a good thing, because if it was mainly about the French criminal, I wouldn't really see the point. But it is mainly about Dostoyevsky, and I think it's fascinating. It is part biography of Dostoyevsky. We follow him when he goes to these sort of political circles, and then when he gets accused of of being part of a political circle which was completely illegal under the Tsars, under Nicholas I, and he was sent to Siberia, and we see life in Siberia. And I think one of the reasons why we know all of this is that Dostoyevsky left extensive notes, and so we know what he thought and what he felt, and we can have a clear picture of what happened. So far, I really like this book. So I'm continuing to read this. I should be done this week. Another book that I'm reading and that I've talked about last week is The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. I am about 200 pages in out of 600 and something, so not quite to 2/3 in. And I like it. It's slow. It doesn't go quickly. It's very slow paced. But I like this. I think it suits the period, it suits the themes. At the moment, it sort of is reminding me of Jane Austen. I know, I absolutely love Jane Austen, and I cannot say that I absolutely love Henry James, because I've read one book by him 10 years ago, I'm going to say 10, 12, 15 years ago, at least 10 years ago, and now I'm reading this. So I don't have a ton of experience with Henry James. But at the moment, there are definite similarities. The book opens with tea time in an English mansion. We are on the lawn. There's this older gentleman whom we find out is not a British at all. He's an American banker who made a lot of money and is now made his whole career in London, and he's now living in this great estate along the Thames, 40 miles from London. And he's having tea. His son is a bit farther along, somewhere on the lawn, discussing with a neighbor who happens to be a lord, of course. And while this happens, a young lady arrives, and it is an American cousin of one of the young men. And of course, she is the lady whose portrait is being painted here in this book. And her name is Isabel Archer. One of the main differences, though, with Jane Austen is that I'm not quite sure that the narrative voice is as sympathetic to its character as Jane Austen is. In Jane Austen, we can feel that even though the characters, many of them, are completely silly and completely ludicrous, that these characters are loved. In this book, I'm not convinced, starting with our main character, Isabel Archer. According to the narrator, she is not someone who is exceptional. She spent, up to this point, all of her life in Albany, New York, and that is Albany of the 1850s and 1860s, I guess. So it's not a big town, it's a small town. And in this small town, she is somebody important. In this small town, she is shining. She's a good piano player in that town. She's a great reader in that town. But compared to London, let's say, she's not a particularly good piano player. She's not a good reader in the sense that she's not particularly well read. The reason why she read so much in Albany is because there was not that many people to talk to, so she would rather talk to people than read. She's not particularly educated. She didn't go to school. She doesn't speak half a dozen languages. She has never traveled the world, and she's not particularly pretty either, and she's not rich either, and basically she has no qualities, except that she's very nice, she's clever, she has a very strong sense of independence, and that is the thing that makes her stand out, is that she wants to be independent. So the similarities with Jane Austen are that we are in the world of rich people, we have young people who apparently have marriage on their mind. And our main character here, Isabel Archer, I don't know if I'm spoiling things, but it's less than a third of the way in. She receives marriage proposals and she wants to be independent. So this is a bit, I think it's the crux of the book, is how she will manage. Will she be able to assert this independence that she wants? Does she really want that independence? Or will she come to the conclusion that true independence is marriage, or that she would be happier in marriage, or whatever? I don't know exactly, but I don't know at all what's going to happen. Yeah, that is so far where we are. It's a young woman and she receives proposals. Though I have to admit that if she had not been proposed to, I would not have figured out that she was charming. As I said, the narrative voice is not that nice to the characters. So maybe I'm wrong. I have to read more, of course. I have to read the entire book to know for sure. But at the moment, I'm still struggling a little bit with this narrative voice and the characters. There seems to be not so much a gap, but yeah, I still have to reconcile them. They're not completely reconciled in my mind. So I still have 400 pages to make my mind on that. So yeah, I still have time to understand it. Something else that I am reading is African short stories. It is for Reading Africa initiative organized by Mark from Book Time with Elvis. Basically, there is the Africa Cup of Nations going on at the moment. It started last Sunday, and each participant is associated with one team. My team is Guinea. So I read a book by a Guinean author, and it was set in Guinea. And that book, I talked about it last week. It was The King of Kahel by Tierno Moninembo. And now, depending on the results of my team, I would perhaps have had to read more. But my team won its first game and it tied the second. I was very surprised because the second game was against Senegal, and Senegal is one of the favorites to win. But it's not doing very well. It scored 1 goal so far in 2 games. And anyway, so I have this book in case I need to read short stories or something by an author from another country. But I thought that meanwhile I could start by reading short stories by authors from countries that are not in the Africa Cup of Nations. So I've read 2 so far, and one of them in particular is very, very good. Well, the other one is good too, but one struck me most. It's The Gentleman of the Jungle by Jomo Kenyatta. And it is an allegory in a way. It is the story of a man, ordinary man, who lives in a hut near the jungle. And one day or one night, I don't remember, it's raining very hard, and an elephant comes by, Mr. Elephant, and the elephant asks the man, it looks like you have a bit of space in your hut. Could I put my trunk in your hut so that it's not being rained on? And the man says, of course. And then the elephant just not only puts the trunk in, but the head, and then a paw, and then the entire body is in the hut, and there's no place left for the poor man. So the man complains, and he goes to the king of the jungle, and the king of the jungle is a lion, and says, yes, 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 I am hearing you, we will create a commission. And the commission is presided by Mr. Elephant, and he puts on the commission all of his friends. And of course, it's you can see where it's going. So it is an allegory of how the white man created institutions to take control of African countries while claiming to be fair, claiming to be objective, and knowing better what's supposed to happen, what is a good conclusion, a good law, a good use of the land. And how the local people end up being despoiled, basically. So it's very short. It's 4 pages, but it's good. There's an ending that is a bit spectacular, let's say. Yeah, it was very good. So I'm going to read other short stories in this book. I think I'm going to try to read the entire thing. It's less than 200 pages. So yeah, African short stories. Now, the 2 books that I have actually finished from first page to last page, they are similar in a way. Both are short, and both are by French authors, and both are in French, and both are in the countryside. So, and both are rereads. The first one is this one, Un beau monde. The title in English is Lovers Are Never Losers. It's by Giono. The title in English is awful. It does not reflect the content of the book. It does not reflect the spirit of the book. I don't know why that choice was made. It's a terrible title, but the book is awesome. The reason I was suddenly feeling like rereading it is because of a tag. It is the Fab 4 tag that was created by Tom at Tom LA Books. One of the questions is about a book that is simple but powerful. And of course, whenever I watch a tag video, I keep thinking, what would I answer? And my thoughts went to this book, and I wanted to reread it. So it's short. I reread it in an afternoon and evening, and I found it just as wonderful as I usually do. Except that this time, perhaps I was more taken by the friendship story than by the love story. The title in English quite says, obviously, that there is a love story in there. But I think the love story is secondary. What I noticed more this time is the friendship story. So we are in south of France in the early 20th century, before agriculture was mechanized, at a time where it took a lot of men, a lot of arms to harvest the wheat and various products of the farm. So we are in one of these farms that hire many men during the season to help work the land. And there's a sort of a meeting of minds between two of the workers. There's the narrator, who is older, probably nearing 50 years old, and a younger one who is about 20 years old. And the young one has something on his mind, something on his heart, and the older one manages to get the younger one to confide in him. And once he knows the story, he decides to help. And he decides to basically take the younger man's problem and try to find a solution. So I thought that was the wonderful part of the book. It is also the friendship story, and it's the fact that I don't want to say too much because it's a short book, but that this young man, who is a very honorable young man, recognized an honorable older man and thought, okay, I can trust this man, despite the story that had happened to him, where somebody had been less than honorable and not trustworthy. So yeah, that is a good book. I still love it. Yeah, still one of my favorite books of all time. And the other book that I reread was The Devil's Pool by Georges Sand. After reading Giono, I was in the mood for reading Georges Sand because even though they're about a century apart, there's something similar. There's they have something in common, and that something in common that they have is that their stories talk about the countryside. In the case of Georges Sand, it's not the south of France, it's the very center of France. It's the region called Berry, B-E-R-R-I. It's right in the middle of France. It's in the heart of France. And Georges Sand, you probably know, or you may not know, was the lover of a composer, Frédéric Chopin. And she wrote at the height of the Romantic period. And this book is very romantic. It's a reread because I read it first for high school. It was mandatory reading in high school when I was 13, 14. So it's going on 30 years since I've read this. And I remembered nothing. I remembered only the atmosphere, and it's because of the atmosphere that I wanted to reread Georges Sand. So I basically went to the bookstore to try to find some Georges Sand, and this was there, and I thought, oh yes, I've read that. What was it about? And I couldn't remember. So, and also the fact that it was $3.95, that helps too. So I decided to buy the book and to read it. And I kind of remember now why the only thing I remember is the atmosphere. It's because it's the only thing memorable about this book. I hope I'm not being too harsh, but I thought that the characters were quite ordinary and that the story was quite ordinary. It's a short book. It's 120 or 30 pages, depending on the size of the print. And it's very short. It's very simple. But even though this one too is very simple, but this one is powerful, but this one is not. I don't know why. For me, the most memorable thing about this book is really the atmosphere. It's the writing of nature. It opens with the narrator, who is a double of the author, I guess, talking about how a painting, not a painting, an etching by Holbein inspired her and reminded her of something that she had seen. And then she goes on to describe what she had seen, and it's a scene in a field. There's this man behind the plow, and the plow is being pulled by an ox, or perhaps two oxen. And then a bit farther down the field, or in another field, there's a younger man, once again behind a plow, being pulled by oxen. And instead of being led by death in like in the Holbein painting, it's led by a kid who is 7 years old, and whose job it is just to tease the oxen to make sure that they keep moving. And the story is about this man, the younger one, who is a widower. He has 3 children, and he is living with the parents of his wife, of his dead wife. And the parents are telling him, you really should get remarried, because we are not capable of raising the children. And there's another family also living under the same roof. The brother of the wife, or the son of the owner, well, not quite the owner because they are renting the land, but long-term renting. There's another family living there, and the son's wife cannot take care of the other kids because she has kids of her own. So in a very loving way, they're not kicking him out. They're going to take the wife in the house, and they're going to call her a daughter. But he needs to get remarried. So they have someone in mind, and they are telling him, just basically, just go meet that woman and talk to her. And if you think she's going to be a suitable mother for your children, just propose and wait for her answer. And that is the story. He goes to see that woman, and on the way to see that woman, he gets lost. And that is the scene that we see on the cover. It is, he ends up near this swampy place in a forest, and that is called the Devil's Pool. And the description of nature is really well made. The language of Georges Sand is beautiful. I love her writing. However, as I said, the story itself is a bit basic, and the characters are a bit basic too. But it was still a very enjoyable read. At the end of this particular book, that is $3.95, there is a what they call dossier. So basically, it's something to help to enhance your reading experience. I think it's made for college readers or something like that. For school reading, it's pointers for discussion. And it sort of reminded me why I hated mandatory reading in high school. It's not the reading that I minded. I loved generally the reading. It was the discussing afterwards, because there was questions. I never had the answer. Apparently, I never paid attention to the same things as the teacher. And that made me think that BookTube is wonderful for that. That whenever we read a book, we can talk about the aspect of the book that we like. We don't have to talk about all of the aspects of the book. If the thing that we liked, or the thing that struck us the most, or even if it's something we did not like, we can talk only about the characters. We can talk only about a particular chapter. We can talk about only the cover if we want to. There really is no limit to what we can judge as being important or not. And I think it's one of the great differences between reading for pleasure and reading for school, for analysis, is that reading for pleasure, you can think about what you want. You don't have to examine everything. You don't have to come up with the correct answer for everything. As for when you're reading in class, where you're reading for other people, you have to answer the questions that other people are asking. So yeah, there were a few questions in there that even as an adult, I did not pay attention to that at all. And I would have to reread it just to be able to answer the questions. And I thought that, I am thinking, it's unfair to ask that of college kids, of high school kids, to say, okay, just read the book. At the end, we're going to give you the questions. And since you will have not paid attention to it, you will have to reread the book to answer the questions. And that's not fair. So all of this to say that I'm happy that I read this as an adult, not as a high school student. Yeah, so that was it. That is what I read this week. Let me know if you read any of these books or any of these authors, and if you have an opinion on them. Let me know what you've been reading this week, or what you will be reading next week. And that is it for me. Thank you for watching. I will see you in my next video. À la prochaine.